Oh my goodness, you are such an inspiration. Wow, you really are. You're so strong. Can I pet your service dog? Ugh. 1, 2, 3, let's go! We are artists, parents, teachers, good guys, bad guys, students, leaders. I'm not your inspiration, yeah, I'm fully who I am. Got my own expectations that don't fit into your plans. I'm not your sad story, so I wrote it in this song. Everything you know about disability is wrong. Yeah, everything you know. Yeah, everything you know about disability is wrong.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong.
Thanks for listening as always. Today we have a really exciting episode. Today joining us is Spencer West. Spencer is a global keynote speaker, a content creator, and an activist. He's known for summiting Mount Kilimanjaro on his hands and wheelchair, opening for Demi Lovato World Tour, starring in the documentary Redefining Possible, the story of Spencer West, which debuted at the Toronto International Film Festival. He's also the author of best-selling book Standing Tall, My Journey. His character role, the window washer in the Murdoch Mysteries, and he's a content creator with 4 million TikTok followers. In 2021, Spencer West was named the 2S LGBTQ plus trailblazer and the #1 breakthrough star in Canada on TikTok. Spencer was also nominated for a Queerty Award in 2023 for the TikToker category.
And he's been all over media, ABC News, BuzzFeed, CNN, 60 Minutes, and on the podcast with Toronto Realm.
Welcome to the podcast, Spencer West. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you. Wow, you read my whole resume. Thank you.
It's a stacked list. We had to, when we have such a cool guest on, we have to brag a little, like, look who we got. So it's
such a pleasure to be here.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. Before we dive into questions and the meat of the interview, let's go ahead and do our audio descriptions, which is an accessibility feature we love. This is Lily speaking. I am a white presenting mixed race 27-year-old woman. I have green eyes and brown messy hair, and I'm wearing, as always, my black turtleneck, but my fidget necklace that I fidget with in every episode officially broke. So I have a new one. So it looks kind of similar, but it is new.
Nice. This is Erin talking. I am a white woman with red hair, blue eyes, and I'm wearing a striped shirt, sitting in a wheelchair in my bedroom. And I'll pass it to Spencer.
Awesome. Thank you. This is Spencer talking. I'm a 43-year-old white cisgender male. I have a bald head. I have brown eyes. I have a salt and pepper mustache, and I'm wearing round black thick glasses. And I've also got a black t-shirt that has an 80s cartoon symbol of She-Ra on the front. And I'm sitting in a black chair.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Well, listeners, this is a special episode for many reasons. We're just so excited to have Spencer on the podcast, but also this episode will be coming out while you'll be listening to it during Pride Month, which is really exciting. So happy Pride Month to our listeners. If you've been a long time listener, you know that Erin and I are both part of the queer community, and we love Pride Month. So it's really exciting, and we're really excited to have such an incredible queer content creator joining us today. So yeah, thanks, and happy Pride Month, Spencer.
Same to you. It's so exciting.
Absolutely. Well, let's get into it, Erin. You want to take us away with our namesake question?
Sure. So this podcast is named what it is, and we asked every guest, what should people get wrong about you and your disability?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many things here. The first thing that I find always so interesting is the idea that A, a disabled person can be queer, and B, that a disabled person can be queer and also want a relationship, both in a physical sense and an emotional sense. And it always seems so shocking when you disclose that information, and then people are like, wait, what? And I'm like, yeah, newsflash, disabled people also want love and sex and all of the things. We want this very similar human experience of non-disabled folks. So I'd say that's the first one. And then the other thing, it's not necessarily that they get wrong, but everyone is obsessed with my physical anatomy for some reason. Like, and a part of me sort of understands because my t-shirts are long, you can't see that I have a waist or that I'm wearing pants, but like everyone always assumes that like I just am like from my ribs up and that somehow I'm surviving like that. I don't know. So those are typically the two main things that people get wrong, or are confused about my disability.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And there's like the reverse of that too, that, you know, us gay people, we have bodies and brains, which means that disability will affect us too.
Correct.
And it just feels like there's a sense of like, people think you get one identity. It's like, actually, there's layers to this. I think that that's something that, especially when you have intersectional identities, is just something you have to face. Of people really like to be able to put you in one category. But what you talked about with people being obsessed with your physical anatomy kind of takes us perfectly into our first question. You have a pinned video on your TikTok that is answering the invasive questions that I'm sure you deal with frequently. What was your kind of thought process behind making that video? And like, how do you toe that line of, you know, answering the questions, but not completely obliterating your own privacy?
Yeah, it was just it's such an odd thing. I've gotten it my whole life, like in person. And so I don't know why I didn't think about that it was going to happen online. And specifically as my TikTok grew and my Instagram grew, it just became the question that people wanted to know over and over again. So I initially was like, okay, like I'm fine to answer this once. Like I get that it's confusing, and I like to use social media as a way to educate folks specifically about disability. But the questions just kept coming, and it didn't matter how many times I answered, like, do you have a penis? Like, are these where are your body parts, and do they work the same? And so for a while I started to lean into it, and I started to make funny videos around the idea of it, because it was so absurd that like non-disabled folks feel entitled to ask those questions, and B, the fact that they feel entitled to an answer, and then if you're not going to give it to them, they're upset. So, I discovered that one of the I don't know if it's still a thing, but one of the big search things on TikTok was, does Spencer have a banana? Because I think that was like a way to like soften it so they didn't have to write in the word penis. Anyway, to make a very long story short, I did a whole video about like, where's my banana? And I like had an actual banana with me, like, and I was like, no, it's right here. Like, I keep it right here. Keep it in my bag,
Oh my God. I mentioned this in a previous podcast, but like sometimes non-disabled people say the funniest shit about your disability, and it's just like you just have to bring it back to them with humor, because it's like if you didn't, you're like dealing with ableism every day is very hard. So sometimes you just have to laugh and turn it around on them, because what else?
Exactly. I've definitely given it back, and it happens in person too. It doesn't just happen online. It's people are less inclined to do it in person, but sometimes when they do, if they ask about my genitals, they'll be like, well, where's your penis? And then I usually will give it back to them like, well, where's your penis? I don't like, it's where it's supposed to be. I don't know. It's not like it has its own calendar.
It's on vacation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we through Easter Seals, we make a lot of content just trying to help like friends and family of disabled people understand like disability etiquette, yada yada. And I think on like every page there's something that we write that's like, if you wouldn't ask your non-disabled friends about how they use the bathroom or the bedroom, don't ask your disabled friends that. And it's like,
exactly.
Yeah, there's a certain level, especially being autistic, having like a social disability. I'm always like, aren't you non-disabled people supposed to know what you're supposed to say and what you're not? Because I spend so much time being like, how do I human? And then you think you could just walk up to someone and ask them about their genitals? Like it's just, oh, it's silly, and I'm glad you deal with it with humor, and that you're willing to deal with those invasive questions, because I do think that the type of content you're making will help other people who are like the younger generation hopefully have less of those questions. Like, we are kind of in a new world where we have like a lot of disabled content creators, and I think people are getting used to seeing disability every day. So I can only hope that that leads to like a generation of people who see us as full humans and don't decide to dig into those really invasive questions.
Yeah, and I don't know if you two experienced this as well, but I sort of came into the world being told that my job was to be non-disabled folks' educator on disability. And it was such a revolutionary act, and I can't remember who I heard it from. I can't remember if it was Judy Heumann or Alice Wong, but I read somewhere it was like, we don't have to accept that role. And literally this happened to me just like 2 years ago, and I was like, what? I can say no? I can decline and say, like, I don't want to talk about my penis in the middle of the grocery store? Like, that was such a revolutionary idea for me, the fact that I could pick and choose when I wanted to be folks' educator. And some people are totally comfortable doing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and that's great. But for me, I'm like, no, I just want to buy my shirt here at H&M and I want to go home. I don't want to talk about how I go to the bathroom today. Thank you. And that to me was like such a revolutionary act. The idea that like, I don't have to answer if I don't want to.
Did like learning that, how did that affect the way you have like other boundaries in life too? Like, that feels like a very like, ooh, I'm allowed to have boundaries moment.
That feels like the last boundary that I discovered. I felt up until then I was learning about boundaries and how to set them. But that felt like sort of like the last one of like, oh, this could also be a boundary.
Yeah, I know for me, I've made videos on social media explaining my disability, explaining how I play video games, and those videos always do amazing on social media. But I didn't want to make them all the time. I just wanted to, make videos about reading books. That's what I love to do. And those videos don't perform as good. But I still gave myself that, I don't have to be an educator. I can just share what I love. So I think that's really important for disabled people. Yeah.
I do too, and I'm so glad that you said that out loud, because I think that's so important. I'm literally my same experience. My content where I show people how I do things or how I navigate the world does really well, and I think there's an important space for that. But the minute you deviate from that, the minute you try to be just a normal human, people are no longer interested. And I think that's an interesting dichotomy that I think a lot of disabled folks face. Unless we're going to do something really cool or inspirational porny, then people don't really want to engage in that regard. And that's tough to grapple with.
Right. Totally. Absolutely. It's like you're kind of giving in to people's curiosity, and it almost feels like, I don't want to say shameful, but it feels like, I don't know, like I'm doing something against my former disabled advocates. Like, they would hate to see me doing this, I'm thinking. And that's not, not to say that doing it is bad, but it's just that struggle, the internal struggle of like,
Absolutely.
Is this okay? Am I doing the right thing?
Yeah.
Etc. So.
Yeah, and like putting yourself on display, like there's kind of a level, and I think about like, there are like non-disabled comedians, for example, who are doing similar things where, you're using like the trials and tribulations of your life, and those stories always perform the best. But there is a certain level of like, at what point are you no longer having fun with it? Because it feels kind of compulsory. And that kind of goes into, I think, what we were just saying, that like, because of the inaccessibility of the world, there is a level of, as a disabled person, throughout life, you have to be a self-advocate at least. Like, there's a level of advocacy that is, you just have to. But I think if you can like check in with yourself and know you're enjoying what you're making, maybe that's like where the line lies. And you can tell when people like their videos. Like I love when you can tell an artist loves the art they're making. Like that is really cool. You mentioned the line between like inspiration porn, and that kind of goes into a question I wanted to ask you. As a you do a lot of motivational and keynote speaking. How do you balance, and this is a question for our listeners here, but also as like a young disability advocate, just thinking about how do you balance that line of like wanting to motivate and sometimes inspire, but without becoming inspiration porn? Like, how do you balance that? Because I've never felt like in any things I've watched of you, I've never felt like you crossed into that inspiration porn territory.
Yeah.
So how do you balance
thank
that?
you. That's very kind of you to say. And like, can we swear on the podcast? Is that okay? Okay, great. Okay.
Yeah.
Because like the story that I want to tell, I think emphasizes this. So when I was first becoming a speaker, I had a really lovely mentor, and they would work with me like once a week, every Sunday in their office. And I remember I delivered a speech once to them, and they're non-disabled, and they weren't thinking from a disability lens, but it clicked in for me. I finished my speech, and he looked at me, and he was like, listen, this is great, but like, I have my legs. Why the fuck should I care about your story? And that, to me, what I learned from that was like, oh, when I speak, I have to be able to relate my experience to someone else's. And so what I try to do is, although I might share a story and it might involve my disability, I bring it back to whatever the audience is. If it's like an audience full of healthcare workers, for instance, in one of my speeches, I talk about the importance of asking for help. And I talk about how when I was climbing Kilimanjaro with my two best friends, I needed their help the first half. And then on summit day, they needed my help because they got altitude sickness and I didn't. And then I try to bring it back to what you all do in the healthcare sector is you help people. That's your job. Your job is to help people on a daily basis. So for me, it's trying to take my story and not infantilize it and not make it sound like, look I did this great, amazing thing. It's like, yeah, I climbed Kilimanjaro, but this is actually the lesson that you should learn from this, is that I learned the importance of asking and offering for help. And then how does that apply to you? So that's what I try to do. I think Kilimanjaro, unfortunately, was at the time when I was just discovering and being proud of my disability and unlearning a lot of ableist and unjust sort of thoughts that I had. So Kilimanjaro does toe the line, pun intended, on a little bit of inspiration porn without me realizing it. But that's sort of what I try to do in my speeches is anytime I'm going to say something, how do I relate it back to the people so that they can see it from their own perspective and not from mine? Because they're never going to understand what it's like not to have legs. Only people that don't have legs will understand that. So that's what I try to do. I don't know if I'm always successful, but that's what I try to do.
Yeah, I think that was just a really clear answer. I really understand that like the moral can't just be like, wow, I can't believe that person did that. Like, it's got to be relating back. That's really great. And yeah, I think that, what you said about you were early in your kind of acceptance of your identity, and that like is something I love about the disability community is like, I think we all have this understanding that there's a lot against us and like, we're not going to be perfect. And there's things that seem like advocacy that I have done that then I look back on and I'm like, I think I missed the landing there. But, I think even like hosting a podcast like this, it can be nerve wracking because,
Totally.
like language changes and what's acceptable changes and things like that. But I think that there is a level of understanding of like, we're able to say, actually, I don't know if I'd do that again. But also like, you could have just wanted to climb Mount Kilimanjaro just because it was a super cool experience with your friends. I'd say that it was, it's the people who are seeing like content around that and being like, wow, let me send this to someone with the caption like,
if he can do it, I can go up the stairs today. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Like how do you two avoid that? Like, what do either of you have examples of ways that you avoid the inspiration porn?
I just no. I mean, I just like I don't have like a plan. I just either like sometimes I just stop engaging in something if I'm realizing this is not me, or I will say no a lot, which people don't like that. But you have to like protect yourself, and I feel it's important for me to handle my own media. I don't like someone else telling my story, so I try to avoid that as much as I can. And I just think, being a self advocate is how I avoid it.
Yeah, I've definitely learned a lot from Erin on like that it's okay to have boundaries. It's really nice to be like 27 and have a 40-year-old woman to like look up to and be like, okay, thank you for showing me that I'm not a terrible person if I say no to someone. But I think that for me, the inspiration like porn that I kind of face in life is, as an autistic person, I get told that I'm childlike a lot. And what people I think are trying to say is that like I haven't lost my wonder, like, and or that I still enjoy the concept of like play. And so I used to really lean into that and be like, I am childlike, and like it's you can call me that. That's great because I'm fun and silly. And it was when I noticed that I was not taking myself seriously anymore that I realized like, oh, I'm performing this because it inspires other people. And it, people who are locked in the world of adult capitalism see me like wanting to play with my toys and are like, wow. But so that's been something for me of when whenever people kind of bring that up, I try to clarify, like, I think you mean playful because I'm a grown woman. Like I'm actually not a child. And the fact that I like a stuffed animal does not actually mean that I can't like make choices for myself. And so I think that's a way that I kind of avoid it, is that I have to ask myself, am I taking myself seriously here? But it's a hard line to walk, and it's like all about our perception of like how other people are perceiving us. So I think it's a thing that maybe non-disabled people don't realize, that disabled people are combating like this own, not just ableism, but also how we're presenting ourselves and how we're representing our community. It's a big thing. It's a heavy thing to carry at times. And that kind of brings us, I think, to our next topic. Obviously, this is our Pride Month episode, so talking about identity is exciting. What does like identity pride mean to you, and how do you kind of separate your LGBTQ pride and your disability pride? Or is it very similar?
Yeah, I mean, I think they intersect, right? I think the one thing, as I was listening to you ask the question, that I grapple with is that it can be hard to celebrate my queer pride as a disabled user or as a wheelchair user, because most queer spaces aren't accessible. So like being able to celebrate my queer pride can be difficult. And I have a lot of privilege with my disability. I don't have any legs, and I'm able to get out of my wheelchair and walk on my hands. So I can walk upstairs into a space. Someone can help me carry my chair. I can even carry my chair up a few stairs myself. But I got to this point a couple years ago where I was like, I don't want to use this privilege anymore, because what I'm doing is I'm allowing spaces and people and experiences to say that it's okay. And look, this disabled person can get in here, so why does it need to be accessible? And I don't represent the majority of people, specifically when it comes to wheelchair users. And so I've really stopped, whenever possible, not leaning into the capitalist notion of like, I'm still going to support this business even though other disabled people can't. And so I think for me to sort of get back to your question, queer spaces are hard for me to access, and I'm no longer willing to use the privilege that I have to access them when other disabled folks can't. And so I find it can be difficult to celebrate that queer pride in a larger way. It's fun to go, here in Toronto, we have a huge Pride Festival. We have an entire queer village and street that celebrates, and there's lots of activities that I can go to and visit outside. But like on a regular basis, Like I can't access bars. They don't typically, here in Toronto, a lot of the washrooms are in there, or bathrooms are in the basement. So I can't even get in the building. And if I can't really access the washroom. So I don't really get to have the queer experience. And then, you know, Aaron, I don't know if this has been your experience. I'd be curious to hear yours too, Lily. Like the bars and the tables are so high that like I can't interact with anyone or have a conversation with anyone. And so it's just, the experience is not fun for me. And I tried for so many years to go and do it. And I realized as I've gotten older, I was like, I'm doing something I don't like to do and that I don't feel welcome at and isn't set up for me. So I think I struggle with that. But then on the flip side, I also feel like it's an act of protest for me to show up and be like, listen, I exist. I dare to exist. I deserve to exist, and I deserve to have these identities as well. So it's an interesting back and forth.
Yeah, I totally hear you about the bar situation. We have a restaurant by us that just opened, and all the tables are high. And it's like, ADA, hello?
Yeah.
We have to have a space. That's why the ADA is very important still. Even though it's not perfect, it is very important. But yeah, like, I do get what you're saying about wanting to show up as an act of, like, here I am, living my life, but it is disheartening to encounter that, like, all the time. Just inaccessible spaces.
I know.
Not cool.
Go ahead.
Yeah, and there's also like with queer identity pride, there's a level of so much of the like safe places we've been able to find are in like bars and nightlife, which like thank you to the, you know, amazing drag queens who led most of our pride movements and got us here. But like there is a level of sometimes I feel like the only time I'm like really holding my queer identity and being like, I'm gonna go flirt with women tonight has to be in a bar. And bars are really hard for me. There's so much sound and smells, and it's really hard for me to have a conversation. And also like when I'm in a space like that, I've created a mask for myself that's like who I need to be in this space. So it's hard to have identity pride when it's like, well, I'm lying. Like I've made a fake version of myself here. So it's hard. And I think that that's something that I've been really trying to do is like find ways to love being queer that aren't necessarily nightlife. And, you know, there's, you can be a boring queer person if you want. Like you don't have to go to bars. And that's been kind of a journey for me, is understanding like, how do I embrace that in other spaces? And that makes the accessibility is a whole other layer to that, I think.
I think it's also like important to note, like here in Toronto, we also have some amazing organizations that are doing great stuff. So we have something, a group here called the Disability Collective, and they do like a queer disabled cabaret night at one of the one accessible bars here in Toronto. And the entire, anybody can like apply to perform, and it's just a night that's safe for disabled and queer folks to celebrate the art that they create and be a part of that. So there are spaces that we're starting to figure out how to create and how to create access for. But as per usual, it's always up to us, right? Like we're always the ones that have to figure it out and have to navigate the system and. But I think it's important. It can be so easy for at least myself, I can only speak for me, where I'm like, oh, it all sucks and it's hard. And like, I don't feel like I can belong, but I'm like, but there's good things out there too. And there's groups that are doing good things to advocate for us and to help us have space and community. So that does also exist, you know, and I think it's important to note too.
Yeah, those spaces are so incredible. And like, I think that I feel like there's been a kind of like cultural shift in the world of this understanding of how important community is. And I do see that like popping up more of these like groups that are specifically like, we designed this for you. And I hope that there's at least one person who listens to this and has been like wanting to start something. Do it. It's great. Like, we need these spaces. One of my close friends and I started a queer sober comedy night, because so many comedy shows are based around like spaces that are filled with alcohol, and there are comedians who don't feel safe in those spaces. So we like kind of threw it together, and we have said it's kind of our like field of dreams moment, where like, if you build it, they will come. And it has been the case. Like, it's not been as much work as you expect. I think that, and I say this just for anyone who's listening who's wanted to start something like that, it's not as lofty as you'd expect. People want community, and we'll show up. And we're everywhere. Us LGBTQ plus disabled, we're everywhere. So like, we'll come to anything. I think that, and you've dealt with the inaccessible venues and kind of big spaces as well, because I think I watched your TikTok that was, getting nominated for the Queerty was amazing. That was an inaccessible venue, right?
Yeah, it was. And it's just one of those unfortunate things. Again, like, the privilege of my disability is I could make it work, but would that have been anyone else, like, it wouldn't have worked for them. They wouldn't have been able to really participate.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, as there's still lots to be done.
Definitely. I mean, it's listeners, when we're recording this, it's the week after the Met Gala, and that was all I could think about as I was watching the Met. I was just like, this is a lot of stairs.
And some people had to be physically carried up the stairs because of their dresses, and I'm like, I just think, imagine Anna Wintour building this incredible spiral ramp that in itself could be a showpiece for the Met, and where you could have like a pit of photographers. Like, ask us, disabled folks. We are so innovative. We will help you. We will make it happen.
Yes, especially with a thing like the Met, where it is about like innovation and design and new idea. I'm like, that's a space where you need disabled people. I'm telling you, disabled people would come up with the coolest things and interpret the themes so well. Like, we've had to be innovators our entire lives. So give us space to get to show that off. Like, yeah, definitely. So one question I wanted to ask was, as we're talking about inspiring our listeners to maybe go out and do their own thing, obviously right now in the TikTok world, just social media in general, there is more space than there ever has been for disabled content creators. What is your advice to someone who is like really wanting to make their own content, wanting to share their story, but feels like, they don't need my voice in this space?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I think one of the great things about social media is that we have control of the narrative for the most part. If you want to share your story, you get to share it how you want it and how you want people to receive it. And, for so long, we as disabled folks didn't have control of that narrative. Someone else was telling it for us. And in some spaces that's still happening. But I think that's the beauty of social media, that if it's something that you really want to do, you get to do that. And you get to decide how much you let people in, and you get to decide what you want to share. And I think that is the beauty of social media. Now, as we all know, when you open yourself up, unfortunately, that also opens you up to questions and things that you may not want. And I just want to be clear, like, you don't have to accept that, and you don't have to be okay with that. Some people feel like, and I said this for a long time too, that I was like, I know that I'm signing like a social contract with like, this is what I sign up for, but yes and no. Like, yes, I realize that probably could happen, and no, I don't have to accept that. And so I heard someone else say this once, and I wish I could remember who it was, but I've sort of been treating my social media like this. I'm like, my social media is not a democracy. I get to decide how safe the community is, and I get to decide who gets to engage and who doesn't. And if you're here to cause harm to the communities that I belong to or to anyone, then you don't get to participate anymore. So I think for anyone that wants to use social media, I think it's a great idea. But I think these are the things to think about when you do it. But at the end of the day, it's your story and it's your life, and you get to do that however you like. So for me, it's hard to give like necessary advice other than I can just tell you what my experience has been,
Yeah.
I think that's phenomenal advice, though, the thinking about like how you're going to protect yourself before launching into that public space.
I have a question related to that. Kind of a selfish question. But as somebody who also does YouTube and stuff, how do you manage? It's a lot of work, YouTube
Mm-hmm.
and TikTok. How do you manage your schedule and like filming? Do you batch film? How do you like stay on top of
That's a
it?
great question. Aaron, it's literally all over the place. like some weeks I'm really good and I'm able to like come up with, because I post Monday through Friday. And so some weeks I'm really good. Like I have a business partner and a friend who's non-disabled who I've been working with forever. And we make a really good team. So I'm not having to come up with all of the ideas on my own. So we usually meet on Monday and like try to come up with ideas for the week or as much as we can. And then we'll have another meeting maybe midweek to come up with other ideas. And then if I know that I'm going to be away, we try to come up with ideas and then I'll try to backfill so that then when I'm away, I still have content to post. But I'm not always good at it. And then then you fall out of the algorithm, which sucks. And then you have to like fight to get back in again. And it's a constant circle. So I'm not always great at it. And that is one of like the difficult things about social media if you're using it for a way to also make money. And I think that's the important distinction. I do use it as a revenue stream. So part of me has to continue to keep pumping out content for that. For me, though, what I've done and what we did from the very beginning when we started to have a bit more exposure is I set up some rules for myself. And I said, as long as my content has either heart, humor, honesty, or awareness, or a combination of those four things, then I'm doing my job right. So that gave me the freedom to like, not everything has to be educational. Some things can be fun and those sorts of things. But it's really hard, Aaron. It's really hard to stay on top of it. It's really hard to come up with 5 ideas every week, all year. It's exhausting. I burn out a lot for sure. And that's when I lean on my business partner and friends to like help me come up with ideas and stuff to fill. And I'm trying to be less rigid about sticking to, like I'm trying to give myself more breaks. But it's hard because then you fall out of the algorithm. That's been my experience anyway. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but it's like adulting. Like no one has it figured out, and this is no different, you know?
Yeah. And they change the algorithm like every other day. But yeah, that's great advice.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that advice I think matches with the kind of shift we've had in the world of like that your whole life doesn't have to be your job.
Yeah.
Even if your job is content creation, like there is a level of that balance. So I love that you found that balance, and I think having those values seems like a really great way to just like ensure that you're staying aligned, because I think that when I start to get like burnt out is when I'm just like, okay, just make whatever then, like just get whatever I can done. And I think having those values to like realign yourself with is just really smart and makes sense how you get so much good content.
Thank you. I also want to say too, like I'm 43, you know, and like I'm so glad that this happened to me at this time in my life, because if I would have been in my 20s, I think it would have been a mess. It would have been really hard for me, and I would have really wanted to like please people and make content that people wanted, not what I felt was authentic to me. And so a lot of this also comes with time and experience and life experience of like, no, I know what my boundaries are, and if there's a day that I start getting difficult comments or something, I'm like, I'm not coming back to these comments. I'm not going to answer them. I'm not going to move forward. And I also made a rule for myself where I was like, if I can't answer everyone's DMs, I'm not answering anyone's DMs. That's just like a boundary for me. And I think that just comes with time and experience, and you have to figure out for yourself what works for you. And that works for me, but that may not work for y'all who are listening or the two of you, you know? So I think that there's that aspect as well that I think is important to name.
That is great.
I'm so glad you named
very relatable, because I'm also in my 40s, and it's like I just don't care about what other people think anymore. Because if I did care, I'd be in bed trying every day.
Yeah, I think that is like in your 30s or 40s and 50s even, it's like a safer age to have the public eye on you, because I do think about that, like in the autism community there's like, you know, a lot of late diagnosed, but still very young people who are like between 18 and 22, and they're making tons of content, getting tons of eyes on them. And, you know, as a 27-year-old, I think back to like the stuff I was making when I was 22. And I'm like, if I had millions of eyes on that, that would have really dictated what the rest of my life would have looked like, which is no shade to anyone who gets, you know, a lot of attention young, but is just a reminder that like, it's worthwhile to spend the time to get to know yourself and who you are, so then you can, you know, be like Spencer and have real boundaries because you've learned them through life experience. I think that's super important. And there's so much pressure on like 20-year-olds. It feels like you got to have your entire life figured out. You got to have your niche audience by the time you're 30 or you're no one. And that's just not true. It's just a manufactured
and
pressure
like
out
I
there.
didn't know who I was in my 20s. And I think that's why when you get to your 40s, at least for me, my 30s were learning who I am. My 40s are learning how to live it. And I think,
Oh, I love that.
and some people get there faster. So like, you don't always have to wait till your 40s. But for me, that's what it took. And I wouldn't have been able to be successful now had I not had if I didn't know who I was, you know, and that can always change and evolve. But like, I'm so grateful it happened now because I have a stronger sense of self than I did when I was in my 20s.
I love that. I think that is a real nugget of wisdom, listeners. Keep that. Well, before we get into the final section of our interview, you know, we talked about LGBTQ plus pride a little bit because this will be coming out in June. But one of the best parts about being queer and disabled is that all summer is for us. It's actually, yeah, you can't enjoy sunshine if you're not disabled. It's for us. June and July, that's ours. But yeah, so if you don't know, listeners, June is Pride Month, but there's another Pride Month in July. We have Disability Pride, which is phenomenal and necessary. What was your journey with like going from just maybe acceptance to pride in your disabled identity like? And like, what does, if you have an answer for this, what does that like pride feel like?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing, if I want to address like my journey of self-acceptance and even just being confident to say I am disabled and I love that I'm disabled, like that was so hard. And I would say it's only been in the last 10 to 15 years that I've been able to confidently say that. And part of that work was I had to undo what I learned. You know, I grew up in the 80s where disability was talked about differently. It was you don't want to be seen as disabled. You want to overcome your disability. You want to prove that you can do things just like everyone else. And so that's the headspace and how I sort of navigated the world. And although I don't have any legs and I'm a wheelchair user, like I said, I had a lot of privilege and I could get out of my wheelchair, and learning was, my disability didn't affect the way I learned. And so for all intents and purposes, I didn't really interact with other disabled folks. And so I sort of had this, it wasn't an arrogant air, but I was like, that's not my community. Like, I don't belong there. And then as I started to learn about disability justice and as I really leaned into just justice work in general, I was like, wow, what I've learned is so wrong. And it's actually limiting myself and it's limiting who I am. And I had a lot of learning to do. And I still have a lot of learning to do. So a lot of the videos that I make now are just in real time, me learning new concepts and things that I think a lot of disabled folks have been saying for 50 years that I'm just catching up to. I'm giving a speech once, and for the first time I just tried it out, and I was like, I talk about my identities of like, you know, being an uncle and being a brother and being a grandson. And then I was like, and I'm also disabled and I'm proud to be disabled. And for 2 or 3 years, I had to just say it out loud until I believed it. And then of course, therapy really helped. I've gone through a lot of therapy and really examined in my internalized ableism and the systemic ableism that I've learned through our global sort of culture that we've curated. And so it's been a real journey, but now I'm really leaning into, I feel like I'm at a point now where I'm really starting to be able to lean into the pride part. and learning that disability pride exists. And this is the second year I'm on. Toronto has a disability pride march every July, and this is the second year I'm on the planning committee with that. And that has just been such a joy to be in space with other disabled folks and to talk about what pride and a pride march looks like for us. But it's taken a lot of really hard work and making a lot of mistakes and a lot of learning to figure out what that looks like and how do I celebrate that and what does that mean? What does that mean for me?
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's incredible, and I'm glad you've gotten to that point. And I think it's really important to say out loud that, like, you can say things that you want to believe before you fully believe them. Like, you can say, I'm proud of my identity, even if you're still feeling like I feel a lot of imposter syndrome in my identities, but I'm still going to say out loud that I feel very secure, because the more I say that, I hope by the time I'm in my 40s, then I will feel secure. And you're not a liar. Like, it's okay to just try it out. Like, how does it feel to say I'm disabled? That's
and to just like celebrate that or remind yourself. RuPaul at the end of every Drag Race episode says, you can't love yourself. How in the hell are you going to love somebody else? And I heard RuPaul say in an interview, they were like, I'm saying that to me. He was like, the whole reason that I started doing that is a reminder to me. And he was like, it caught on. So like in the caption of every video that I create, I write at the end, and Spencer looks very handsome doing this thing. And for me, that's a reminder that like I am worthy of love and I am attractive, and because I don't always believe those things. And so I found for me that if I say them, even if I don't quite believe them in the beginning, I usually get there.
I love that.
Yes.
And I'm a big Drag Race fan.
Oh,
so
yes.
knowing that fact. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Saying that too. That's wonderful. I love that. Well, okay. So we have a bit of time left. The third section of our interview, we like to, this is an Easter Seals podcast. So we like to talk about the Easter Seals pillars. So for listeners and for you, Spencer, just so you know, at Easter Seals, we are working to bring equity and access when it comes to community, healthcare, education, employment, and transportation. So we like to kind of, those things affect every single person. Mm-hmm. These are the social determinants of health. But they look different to each of us. So we've talked about it a little bit, but when it comes to community, how has both online community and in-person community helped you with that journey for identity pride?
Yeah, I mean, it's been so important. The online community has been so important because I've been able to learn from so many amazing activists, like, Amani Barber and Crutches and Spice. Like, her content is, I can't get enough. And she really goes for it. And, I had the opportunity to be on Judy Human's podcast, not too long before she passed away. And so I think social media has allowed me to be able to tap into a community that I think it would have been harder to have access to if social media didn't exist. Can you remind me can you repeat the question again? Because there was something else I wanted to say, but I've forgotten.
Just how has that community helped you with your own kind of identity? And just how important
so
is
then
community
I'm
in general?
In person, I have an incredible friend. Her name is Sally. And, all my friends have been really supportive, but she was the first person. We were all going out one time and she was like, hey, do you want me to call and ask if they're accessible? And it was like such an emotional moment for me to be like, oh my God, I didn't know that I needed that. But yes, I actually do. I would really love for you to do that if you don't mind. And that was the first time where someone in my close circle saw me and know it and recognize the extra labor I was doing to exist in our friendship group and to offer to hold space and take some of that labor off of me and to do that. And then it was mirrored and my other friends started to do it too. And I think that was like a really profound moment that I don't think I've ever talked about publicly before, but that was a really profound moment for me. And I have a partner and we're just celebrating our 2-year anniversary. And he's, from the minute we met, he's always been so good at that doesn't have, that's not a labor that I have to do. He's happy to take that on. And that was such a freeing and beautiful moment. And this, and it turns out some of these friends have discovered they have disabilities now too. And so how do we care for each other, and how do we do that care work and help each other manage that labor has been such a beautiful, beautiful thing as we still navigate the inaccessibility of healthcare and transportation and education and all of the things. I think what we do really well as disabled people is we know how to take care of one another and provide that support, or at least provide the space to be like, it's not the same experience, but I can still relate, So the community's been so important for me to learn how to do care work, but also how to receive care work as well.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, I think, Easter Seals has so many incredible programs. And the one that to me, just makes me like get emotional is thinking about the camp experiences that so many of our affiliates have, because, it's those moments where you like can hopefully at a young age learn like, wow, we can help each other and we can be interdependent instead of independent. Like, community is so important. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad you have Sally in your life. What an incredible friend. Friends are so amazing. So wonderful, Sally. Erin, you want to pick the next topic? We've got quite a few. I don't know if we'll get to all of them.
Yeah, I am curious. Easter Seals does a lot to advocate for accessible transportation, especially airlines. And we all know the horror stories. Is it like 32 wheelchairs are damaged every day? How has your experience been with travel?
Yeah, I mean, again, I want to highlight that my privilege of my disability is that I'm able to get out of my wheelchair and walk on the plane myself. So like I don't really need a lot of support when it comes to flying or travel in that regard. And usually what I need is someone to help me carry my bag to my seat, and I've never had an issue with that. I have experienced two things with my wheelchair though. One time I was traveling overseas and I arrived, and the rim where you hold on to push your chairs, I'm a manual chair user, was dented. And so that sucks. And we all know that like wheels are expensive. And I don't think people realize, depending on your wheel, it could be, $500 to $1,000 per wheel. And so that sucked. And I didn't know that you could ask like for compensation. This was a long time ago. So I didn't know that you could ask for compensation. And then one time I was traveling for a speech and the airline forgot to load my wheelchair on the plane. And so I arrived at my destination and there was no wheelchair, and they obviously felt bad, but they were like, well, here, just take this wheelchair. And it was like those like airport hospital wheelchairs and it's one of those things. It's like, we are not a one size fits all. It's like me coming in and saying, we lost your clothes. Here's an extra large pair of pants. I don't care if it fits you or not. This should work. Right. And so those are my two experiences. I'm grateful that that's all that I've experienced. And so for me, this isn't a topic that I feel like I can share a lot about. Watching other people have such horrific experiences when you have to rely on someone else to put your physical body on the plane, So I don't know if either of you or Erin, if you've had an experience that you want to share, because I feel like for me, I want to like pass the mic to you and be like, I want other people to share their stories,
No, like I don't fly because if something happened to my chair, I'd be stuck in bed. And that's very unhealthy and like mentally, physically. So like airline travel is just completely closed off to me. And then you said that not everyone can use the same chair. My chair is very specialized to how I sit. And I think people don't realize how vital that is. I can't even sit in the airplane seat. So, yeah, my experience is that I haven't flown because I can't.
We're waiting. It's a big thing Easter Seals is pushing for, is that we just need plane models where people can stay in their chairs. It's if we can have these luxury first class pods, we can figure it out. I know it. And that's I feel that way about a lot of just innovation in general. It's like, I think if we can do this for the uber wealthy, we could do a lot.
And I think this is where social media plays a great role, because we're seeing that disabled people are telling their stories and media is starting to pick it up, and we're holding airlines accountable. And I think in our lifetime, we'll see that shift. But it's unfortunate the work that it takes to get there.
I completely agree. And that statistic, the 31 or 32 wheelchairs a day, that stat's been around for a long time, but I really don't feel like anyone knew that until a few years ago. And now I do think that, like you said, because of social media and because of the way the TikTok algorithms work, where you're seeing content from people maybe you don't follow, I am hopeful that I completely agree. I think we will see it in our lifetime. And I think that a big part of that is, of all the things that I am incredibly hopeful that we'll see in our lifetimes, I do think that there is a lot of credit to be given to people who are spending their time creating content like yourself, Spencer. So thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for just making disability more visible in general and doing it in a way that is fun to watch and just like you're a joy to talk to. So this has been an incredible recording. I don't want to keep you too long over time because I know Erin and I would talk to you for hours and hours if we could. Before we sign off, is there anything you want to tell our followers, anything you have upcoming, or just a nugget of wisdom you want to leave them with?
I would say there's two things. Number one, I'm obviously always available for speaking engagements, and obviously follow on social media, all the things. All my handles are Spencer to the West, with like the number 2, Spencer to the West.
Cool.
I think the last thing I would like to say is, wherever you are in your journey, specifically as a disabled person, wherever you are is okay. And whether you are comfortable with being disabled or not, just be gentle with yourself. I think there's so much that we already have to experience that if we can learn to be gentle with ourselves and be okay with where we are, and be open to evolving, I think we don't talk about that enough. That's it. It is.
It's a journey. It's not. It doesn't.
Yeah.
It never ends.
Yeah.
Nor should it.
Yeah.
Ever end.
Yeah.
But thank you so much.
It's such a pleasure.
This is amazing. Totally.
Such an incredible way to end the episode. Nothing I could say could top that. That's just so wonderful. And listeners, I hope you are extra gentle with yourself today. It is very important, and we're glad you're here and taking care of yourself no matter where you are in your journey. Thank you so much, Spencer. Just a genuine joy to get to chat with you today. And listeners, happy Pride Month. If you're part of our LGBTQ plus community, happy almost Disability Pride Month. I hope we have a summer of celebrating ourselves, loving our own identities, and being gentle at wherever we're at. So tune in next time for another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong.
If you liked what you heard, go ahead and subscribe and leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you to our listeners, and as always, thank you to Easter Seals for giving us the space and resources to share such authentic conversations from within the disability community to our listeners.
And I'll see you next time for another episode of Everything You Know About Disability is Wrong.
Everything you know about disability is wrong.
This is a podcast brought to you by Easter Seals.
You know, we actually work for Easter Seals, but maybe our listeners don't know what we do.
That's true. Easter Seals is leading the way to full access, equity, and inclusion for disabled people and their families.
And did you know we've been doing this for more than a century?
This includes helping disabled people find meaningful employment and addressing healthcare needs for all ages.
We're proud to serve communities across the country and ready for the next 100 years. For more, check out easterseals.com.